Hey AJ. All right, just kicking off our Halloween edition of the IETF SCITT editors authors meeting for preparation for IETF 118. So with that, so Roy, Hank weren't able to make it. I didn't hear back from Yogesh, and because it's a bank holiday and Halloween, it's kind of a double whammy. So thank you for John and Cedric for joining us. AJ, where are you located?
the the NIST headquarters in Gaithersburg, Maryland. Why you all want
Okay.
to come?
Well, I was
Gettysburg.
Yeah,
Your your little room there reminds me of the room in Gettysburg that I was in 2009, I think, when we were first discussing the 112-bit elimination for SHA-1 sunsets.
it
About
probably was a room like this.
it
The
was
one
about
next
that
to it.
popular.
This
Yeah.
is recorded. I was going to make a bunch of jokes about offices. It's very pleasant, but not much has changed. It's very quaint. I encourage you all to come back. Woo! Forgot about the recording button.
Do you still have the little museum in the parking lot?
Yes,
Great.
yes.
Well,
Well,
it's
yeah,
worth visiting then.
yeah. I wanted to have a nerd outing and have my partner and some of my friends, like, she would come and they would like, we would go to the NIST museum and then go to the Cryptologic Museum down at Mead, since that's way more interesting. But I've never actually taken the time. I need to get passes for people to come, but if you all want to come, I'm sure it can be arranged. It'd be exciting.
it would be.
I can go on and on, but I'm going to ruin this meeting with this. So I'm going to cut it short.
We could end the recording early and venture into those conversations.
Yeah.
All right. I'll share the deck as it is now. And I will paste a link to it also. Give me a second. There. Can't share right now. Oh, that's nice. Okay. Well, do you guys all have access to the deck?
Where
I'm
is
just
it? No, I'm not sure. I haven't looked at it yet. Sorry.
All right, hold on. Let me see if it's something to do with sharing for whatever reason, or copy it from here. Yeah, that's interesting. Once I stop sharing, maybe there's some security feature. Where'd the chat go? Okay, there's the deck. And we'll come back. All right. So first of all, thanks Ori, who's been very active in here. John, I think you popped in a couple of things.
Yeah.
And Hank just got back from a trip, so he promised he would get to it in the next day or so. So this was just copied from, I can't remember which IET, I guess 115 or 116, which was the pulled in slides that I could. So here's where we left off in our agenda. So let's hack on the agenda if anybody has any questions here.
So I've done a bit of hacking on the agenda. As you can see there, one thing that I'll say for you guys, I've got the introduction slides. That's a prescribed format from the area directors that we have to use. So I've got that separately. But that is just 5 minutes. It's the note well and not much else. I want to spend a little bit of time on a few administrative issues, which is essentially, effective use of the communication tools is becoming a problem. I want to, raise that and fix that. There's the meeting cadence. And there've been some issues there, and I've got some guidance from Roman on what we should do. And I think we should take a vote, but I'm aiming to have fewer official interims and more editor meetings and actually make progress. And the co-chair replacement for Hannes. So I think all of these things need to be discussed and potentially voted on in an official convened meeting. So I've bagged 15 minutes for that at the end, as you can see. But it does obviously time box the AOB. So if anyone from experience thinks that that's a terrible idea and it'll all get run over, let me know. Otherwise, that's why I've hacked the agenda here. That's all I changed.
I mean, why wouldn't you move the AOB to the end? Why wouldn't we cover the mandatory stuff first?
Good question. Yeah, I had the other fear that we could lose time for AOBs, but yeah, if we can move that up.
Yeah, I'd rather lose time for the thing that isn't blocking us.
Yeah, sure. And if Christopher Allen comes along again, then we might
Make him sit through our chair election process before he can raise his ideas.
Well, I'm going to send him to you now because
I meet with him every now and then.
Yeah.
I still chat with him, and this is still recorded.
Cool. Okay, so that makes sense. That was the only hacking I did on the agenda.
Okay. Did I hear Notewell as part of the intro? So I'll just move it here.
Yep.
Okay.
And the note very well.
Yes, the not very well. Okay. All right. So there, Notewell, chair slide, placeholder, great. So they'll give us some slides is basically what you're saying.
I've got them. Yeah, they're just in a different template, so it's really annoying to cut and paste in.
If you want to just send them to me, I wind up doing that for Ori as well. Ori actually agreed to edit in place this time. Last time I had a copy of them from Google Slides or something. So it's totally fine. And I think that's what AJ offered to help as well. So these are the two sections that Hank will work on. I don't know if there's anything we want to hop in here just for now, but
these will get done at the hackathon, probably the last 30 minutes of the hackathon. So
that's what I'm fearing, because that leaves no time. So again, thank you, Ori, for popping in there. All right, so registration, John, you want to kick off here?
Yeah, so it's good to have you here, Cedric, because I know you have a lot of views on this. So at 117 or 116, actually, we went through and discovered that there was an issue here. We had some discussion. I think, reasonably dissected what the issues were, but then never did anything about it because we got then swamped into other stuff. So current state is that in the slides for 116, if anyone cares to dig them out, we've got those conclusions, and we decided that keeping it simple was a good idea. There were small edits to the spec to simplify some of the complex subjects, and there was a small edit to the spec to liberate access control type concepts from some overlap with registration policy. So we got to a point where a lot of text was removed in order to make it clear, and then it never got filled in again for the this set of slightly sticky reasons. So there were issues over exactly how application specific they should be, and whether we have semantic interoperability as well as syntactic for certain use cases, which is a constant thorny issue in the whole spec. But I think as things, well, I'll get to what I think. There were issues about whether you have like one registration policy or multiple, or whether you have one but it has multiple sections in it or something. That just simply needs to be decided so that we can write the spec and pluralization correctly. There were some mismatches in the sort of security model where registration policies are sort of security relevant or data quality or integrity, ledger integrity relevant. This two-way model where the issuer could suggest some things and the TS could enforce some other things was a bit difficult. If you tried to formally specify, the individual use cases made sense, but formally specifying it became pretty much impossible. And then, as I mentioned, mixing the streams between general access control and registration policy. So we had all that. We kind of fixed it by removing a lot of text. And it's now time, I think, to put some text back again in order to enable this stuff. So slide, please. We have discussed this stuff, and so this is my best recollection of the shortest set of bullets we can use to describe the requirements that we have for these concepts to go back in the spec. So we need to stay payload agnostic and interoperable. We can't predict all of the use cases or what data would drive those use cases. So whatever structure we use, it has to be extensible. And then we have sort of two broad classes of concerns that used to be covered by this one bit of the spec. One is the general access control, which has API implementability was an issue. If we were going to turn something into a REST API, then as we're proving with the hackathon, it needs to be compatible with things like OIDC or JOT authentication. This is anti-spamming was the biggest one, but also this idea of mandatory identification of statement issuers. And something that certainly last time we discussed this was not clear to some participants, but I think is extremely important, is that there is a difference, there are many differences between the entity that is able to send a protocol message to a server for processing and the entity that used a particular private key to sign a message payload within that protocol message. And we really need to have those very, very separate for 100 different reasons. We don't need to explain what they are, but they need to be different. So we've got those on sort of general access controls, and then there are issues specific to, I think, the original main intent for registration policies, which is about whether a specific statement should actually be added to the ledger or not, or the append-only log. Sorry, I should get in the habit of saying that. There's, these are examples of use cases, but they're good ones. So the owner of a feed should be able to limit which other issuers can write to that feed. So that is a copy and paste, other than the bit in brackets in the middle, of the main requirement sent from 116, and I think it still makes sense. And the second one, I'll see your hand in a second, so I'll just finish this thought.
I'll take your time.
Yeah. A second sort of obvious class of things we need to support there is when statements are either related to each other or to the real world in ways that the issuer is unable to know. So if you're in a decentralized system and you need ordered statements, for example, this is where things like your security version number comes in, Cedric, and other things like that. I can't reasonably know if I'm issuing the most recent statement, because somebody else might just have beaten me to it. But the transparency service could reasonably want to be able to evaluate that quickly and reject out of order or stale or something statement request, even though it's completely legal from a legitimate issuer over a legitimate channel. It fails some other test relevant to the use case, which the TS wants to be able to identify and act on. So yeah, that Cedric, you have a point, but that's, I think, the
you have several points, but maybe you prefer to go through the next slide, or you prefer to take comments now?
If you're happy, it won't take much longer to do that. So proposed go forward direction. So firstly, propose that this be the sort of the spec element which takes the spotlight between now and 119. I think we have to assume once we've done the hackathon and kind of proved it kind of works, I think we need to really move on from this idea of feed versus CWT elements versus sub. I think it's good enough. And let's keep moving. So propose to make this topic, learn from our experience on feeds that we might have to break our emotional connection with specific words, but we should be able to satisfy these two different types of concepts, I think, pretty simply, but let's see how it goes, by addressing two parallel streams in the spec. So we have protocol elements and architecture guidance sufficient to enable simple front-edge access control for identification of protocol clients. That's the first one with the access control. And protocol elements sufficient to enable the signaling from issuer to TS for semantic evaluation of statement suitability, but only syntactic interoperability, meaning you can have common code or common open source libraries that have the correct holes in the protocol messages to insert these things, but not semantic interoperability, meaning we can't force things to understand it or do domain range checking in the client or force two TSs to behave exactly the same way in the presence of exactly the same registration policy info. And that's kind of it. And that's the requirement. And the next slide is just, I want to put some meat on that bone, put some technical example sort of straw man just to inspire people, but I haven't done that yet. So go, Cedric.
Okay, yes, thanks. I think it's great to discuss it, and I also think it's going to take us a while to resolve it fully. So maybe we can take the slides linearly. So one of the issues that I think is quite important, but implicit, because we had a strong disagreement on that, is implementation difficulty. So the main concern, and the reason were stuck with relatively bad examples of registration policies, is that the most interesting registration policies are more difficult to implement on the transparency service. In particular, the most important one, notably the semantics ones, that rely on prior statements that have been recorded, require the transparency service to keep state and to be up to date. And so that's more powerful, but that's also harder to implement. And so in some of the initial discussion for the initial version of the architecture, some of the registration policies were actually omitted because we wanted to make sure that you are not putting too much pressure on transparency services to keep a live log of everything they have registered so far to implement those policies. So the difficulty of implementation and the fact that we cannot ask all transparency servers to implement all complex stateful policies was, I think, a big motivation for getting it done. And it was not very explicit, but it was very important. And so the implementation complexity and how much, if you write an arbitrary policy, in general, it means that the registration policy is a function of everything that precedes in the append-only log. And that's very powerful, but that's requiring that everyone implement them will be too hard.
Yeah. And
so finding trade-offs so that we don't mandate things that are known to be hard to implement, especially for high volume. Transparency log was a big motivation there. I think because of that, many of the interesting registration policies were never in or have disappeared. And my overall concern about the presentation is that it really suggests that it's all about access control, and that if we deal with access control, we can let go with the rest. I actually disagree. I think access control is, it may be necessary, but I don't find it particularly, it wouldn't be my first priority. I think dealing with versioning and configuration of the transparency service, in particular, what is the state of its keying and the like are quite important as well. So it's okay to use access control as an example, but I wouldn't want to overly specialize the discussion on it because in my view, it may be necessary, but it's not the most interesting.
Yeah. So Steve, if you could just go back to slide 12. So however we want to make my capital letters separate stand out more, I said parallel streams earlier. I completely agree with you, Cedric. They are different things. They had been conflated. We need to split them out. And then I guess to your point, we could, we could reorder these bullets in the other order to say, the hard valuable thing to sort out is registration policies and all of what you just said.
So for example, having one use case for registration policies dealing with versioning or to issue multiple versions of a statement, I think it is very important and something that I would put at least at the same level of attention as access control.
Yep.
The reason for it is that we said we can change our mind, but we said initially access control is implementation specific, and we don't care. The only thing we care from a standard viewpoint is the identity of the issuer, not of the person who does the registration. And so initially we said, maybe that's untenable, but initially we said access control can be implementation specific. it's out of scope for the standard. We can change our mind, but that's why, in retrospect, I think the examples were all about versioning or freshness or time-based properties. I can also impersonate Roy, and I think being able to reflect in the registration info or the registration policy, what is the current state of the configuration of transparency service, in particular in terms of keying and configuration is also quite important.
Yeah, so can we see, I'm making some edits because I don't want to take all of the time. I see Yogesh has got a hand up as well. I totally get the point, Cedric. So I'm going to pray you can see my edits.
And we don't need to convert all of those. I will be I will be at the hackathon, and I'm happy to work on those together. I just want to check that you are not onto different planets and this. And
no, I think we're on the same planet. The other thing that I'll add here is that the frontage access control will happen anyway. I mean, it just doesn't. I can't imagine anybody building a service that doesn't have any. So
exactly, yes. No, it has to be there.
Extremely thin, it's fine.
The question is, do we need interop on that? And probably, but yes. So another thing that I believe we discussed a couple of times, but maybe not in the setting of registration policy, has to do with defining application profiles. And so I have a way to say registration policies can be mandatory for all supply chains, but there should be a way to specify your profile, and if something is optional but in the profile, then it becomes mandatory for the transparency service in that particular supply chain. And I think that's a place where we'll probably want to have registration policies be profiled one transparency service at a time. And again, that's something that we discussed in the past. We said we said two things. In fact, we said the registration policy will be set for each as part of the transparency service configuration, but we did not provide any mechanism to describe how that was communicated to users. So that's one approach. The other approach is to say the transparency, the registration policy is indicating by populating the registration info, so that in effect the issuer says what it wants the transparency service to do, and the transparency service should reject a transparent statement for which it does not implement the requested policies mandated by the issuer, putting them in the header. So that's also another thing we discussed, and without being very conclusive, and keep it.
Right.
Again, in that case, I remember cutting a lot of text, of controversial text on all of that.
Yeah, well, as long as nobody tries to.
Yeah.
I think what happened last time is that somebody went into X509 V3 mandatory extensions, and I just lost the will to live. So as long as that doesn't happen again, we can do that.
Okay, agreed. Yes. So something that maybe for it's important for the slides is that I think it's in the assumed requirement. So I don't see the core problem that the issuer and the client cannot reasonably know or evaluate the policies. It's more like there is some transactional semantics. So when you add a statement to the log, you change the state of the log. And for example, you can have a very basic registration policy that says that you can only register a transparent statement once. And clearly, that's a thing where you need to be part of the transaction or of the transparency service to make the arbitrary decision. And similarly for versioning, you don't want to register two statements with the same secure version number, for example. So it's more like security enforcement than knowledge. It's part of the guarantees, and I think those are very important, because it's not only that the issuer and the client do not know, it's that the transparency service is authoritative for what has been recorded in the log so far. And that's the core of most of the stateful registration policies.
Do I give you guys suggestions?
Yeah,
Sorry.
we're on the same planet there, Cedric. So I'll work on the words being simpler.
I think I have a couple of points I noted after hearing to Cedric is this registration. There are two aspects. Who controls the registration policy is one aspect which we haven't settled down, whether it's the issuer controls the registration policy or the transparency service in itself is the master, or it's the its own controller and says that if you want your statements to be registered in my transparency service, these are my this is my single policy. That I think we can leave aside for now because we haven't settled that. What we can simply say is that the registration policy is a simple set of rules which are, because I don't want to we should not highlight a complicated registration policy, because I believe that a more involved or a complex registration policy is barrier to the append only is a barrier to making your statements transparent, basically. So you should be careful in basically, as what Cedric mentioned, we want to say that a registration policy is a simple set of requirements like how the versioning of the statements happen, or duplicate statements should not be allowed to be entered into the transparency service, and those kind of things should be part of your simple registration policy. For now, we can leave it that. And I don't think we should enter into the registration info versus registration policy. We should discuss it in hackathon because we are face to face, but I don't think that can be part of the presentation, at least.
Oh, for the presentation, it may be early, but
yes,
I think it's essential. We need to discuss it in
yes.
particular because now that we remove the feed, we really have nothing standardized to support registration policies. So registration
Well, we do. It's just in the
everything.
subject. Like we didn't get rid of feed. We just said the feed is defined by the subject of the CWT. So we still have that concept.
And I don't understand. Maybe this is not the right time. Maybe I will bring it during hackathon.
Yeah. So now it's a subject, right? So it's it's a bit different, and but yes.
In other words, the concept is exactly the same. It's just that the property was overlapping. I'm trying not to break into jail on this conversation, but I want to make sure we still have the concept of the feed. It's just it's implemented by the subject property.
So is it mandatory? Is it still mandatory? I'm not sure it is mandatory now.
It's similar. Sorry?
Is it mandatory? Can you omit it or not?
It is.
I think now you can.
Mandatory? Mandatory. Yes, it is mandatory. It is required.
Okay.
Another point. We maintain the exact behavior. I'm pulling it up. Sorry, Yogesh, go ahead.
Yeah, I have not. Maybe I missed first 8 minutes of the presentation. So could you please scroll back to this first few slides? 1, 2, 3. Like.
Oh, there's nothing up here.
Oh, okay. Because we need to kind of highlight in this slide deck what has changed since 117. What have we worked upon?
So I thought you were on the call when we created the agenda.
No, I was not there. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. So yes, so chair intro for John. Hank will do, just kind of why is SCITT cool, giving some framing, just a different buzzword of why we're here. Here's the recap. Yeah. And then we're into the registration policy conversation.
Okay. I was not there. So John, do you want me to have this registration policy, or you're going to take it? We can discuss it in the hackathon, but
yeah, I don't mind. I think it just we need to move the spec along, and I think this is by consensus, this is the area of the spec that needs to be moved along. So in many ways, in an awful lot of ways, it's better if I don't present things. So if you want to take it on the same page, I'm happy we can talk about that on the weekend.
Yeah, we can settle down. I'm happy to present, and we can settle. We will discuss more during the hackathon. Yeah.
So I think I was next in the queue, and it'll be hopefully relatively short. So the conversation of what is the registration policy, and you guys, you just brought up a great scenario of like, how do I know what the registration policy is? Kind of the Pat Helen had this fiefdoms and emissaries approach. Like, can I understand what the rules are, and then the client can make sure that they're pre-testing the rules before he even sends them up to know that they're going to fail. So and then registration policies will change over time. Like, we have failed as a human race to get things right the first time. So let's just assume that whatever registration policy is put on a transparency service will evolve over time. So how do you know what registration policy a statement was made against, including in the future when you want to compare two statements. So I thought we discussed this a couple of IETFs ago, where there would actually be a feed that says what the registration policies are, so you can correlate back to them. And we need to figure out how, and I got to double check with the receipt and so forth, identifies, how would you trace something back to know which registration policy was set. So I think a registration policy itself is a statement. And that was, or this is one of the examples I was talking about, what you might have a media type that somehow we know that this statement is of type registration policy, because it's it is one of the only non-opaque headers that we can use for clients and services to iterate upon. So just bringing up, that was part of the ones that I've been kind of holding conversation on related to registration policies, so we can get to this conversation while we were discussing feeds and subjects. That was it.
I'm not sure with next, but yes, I think that's a great example. So one of the use cases you want to discuss. So in particular, in a sense, if we treat the policy statements as opaque, it still provides a way to say the issuer and the verifier needs to understand the payload of the registration policy, but from a registration viewpoint, what the standard says is just which registration policy was applied at registration time. And it's also a good place to illustrate the point that John was making on the client, the issuer not being able to know. So I think in that case, if the issuer wants to register a statement and the policy has changed, then it's not great, but it's sort of okay for the issuer to retry, after re-signing with a new policy. Yes.
Sure, makes sense. And just, John, I know you got your hand raised. Okay, do we want to define some kind of trend, another log that says here's the statements that were tried and failed, or is that implementation specific and we shouldn't venture into that?
That is for the auditors, I suppose.
John's face was perfect. Sorry.
I think, yeah, it's implemented. So I'm going to just take my hand here because it's been up for a while. I just want to make sure, being now, whatever we are, 7/12 of the way through this meeting, that we're on track, right? Because this meeting is to make sure we've got the slides and the content for the meeting ready, right? And the discussion on the content should really be in the meeting. So good to get a line. I mean, I don't object to what we've done, but we've taken quite a long time on here. I think
that was my fault. And I'm supposed to be facilitating the presentation stuff, so guilty. Just too fun. Okay, so just time check to exactly what John's saying, or it's 36 after, or he's got a pretty good section in here. Do we want to move forward and have Ori review? Do we feel we did a good job of registration policies? I want to be careful that I know we have the hackathon. The hackathon is to hack, so I'd love to not spend it assembling our deck. That's why I'm kind of being a nag about getting the slides done this week. Sorry, John, you were starting to say
just not for discussion now, but everyone's got the link to this, right? So on slide 14, I've captured the major gap points that should be covered, and I'll update the slides according to that.
Can I just jump in here real quick? And the thing that you mentioned, John, that said, oh, it's obvious that any implementation will have some access control. I think you have at least a line that states the obvious.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I just hope that one line might be enough.
Because that may be all people want to do. Like if you have access, then you're going to be a good boy and submit things properly. That put that line in somewhere so that people see that. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'll add that to slide 14 too.
Thank you. All right, so moving on, Ori.
So I have two sections.
Color.
The what is it? The sort of covering these APIs and receipt structure. I split apart the CBOR API and the HTTP API. So the first section is just on the CBOR structures. It's basically a high-level API explaining how do you get to a transparent statement. The colors indicate the sort of trustworthiness progressing from brown to green. And it's obviously it's not real code. It's just a sort of general description of the high-level API. And we can get rid of my meme here if we feel uncomfortable with that. I'm fine with it. Next slide. So formatting got wrecked. Someone changed my font.
Yeah, I would say you better prepare a table maybe, or unless you want to preserve some kind of curly braces semantics or something.
Just like a monospace font, really. That's all I'm asking for here. There we go. Thanks. Monospace for the win. This is a signed a statement protected header, including the new mandatory properties and including the X509 garbage at the bottom. It's basically just to try and communicate that we've made some progress and we have some envelope structures that we're that work for the various different cases. Next slide.
I just comment on the texting here. Do we want to use some more clear examples? Like you and I were iterating on one that we put into the spec.
Application JSON. I mean, this is a protected header. This is about as clear of an example as you're going to get. Maybe you're thinking about something else. Do you want like better names instead of?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting
Exactly.
at. Something, because this becomes a pretty big topic on what exactly is the issuer, and to do it in such a way that doesn't break us into jail, but gives enough of a glean that, because these just look too simple, too similar.
It could be 3 could be application SPDX plus JSON, 1 could be Microsoft, 2 could be Windows. That's obviously very, very narrow, but also probably reflective of reality as I understand it. Like we should my preference would be show people what industry is doing. Don't fight over like, trying to deny the reality you exist in. So, I mean, SPDX is a good example of a content type. Issuers are going to be identified with URLs, probably subjects are going to be a different string for every different vendor under the sun because they can't agree. Like, just show some good examples there. I think that'd be better than this neutral one, but I did the neutral one because it's my understanding that, to date, we've tried to keep everything really neutral.
Yeah, I don't mind the neutral, yes, meaning not vendor specific, but we, whether we use the Acme things or something else, but to have something that software,
that's
something like that. But anyway, we can iterate on that a little bit more, but I think that has been the place that is been some point of confusion that we can help with some clarity.
Next.
So Rit, do you want to insist on having a certificate chain or not? It's I'm okay with it, but it's a departure to what we presented earlier. And
as far as I'm aware, it's not. I mean, I would like to just ban X509 from the entire endeavor. Like, you guys keep asking me to fill in details on X509, and I keep saying I'll do it for something else, and then I do it, and then we get the other thing. And so I'm not a fan of it. I think it's confusing. I think it's sort of, but it's a bridge to the reality we live in.
It's a reality, actually. It is how it is.
I don't deny that, and I think we agree on the necessity of it. It's just that my understanding is that before the format in the architecture was not enabling it, and now it does.
I don't understand.
Or maybe it does not, but
X509 and provide examples, or you don't support X509 because you haven't provided any examples or explained how to use it.
I think, okay, I will have to recheck, but I think this will not be a valid style statement for the recent or possibly even the current version of the architecture.
That's true. The current draft does not address X509, despite us being consistently told that we're supposed to.
Yes, and with the excuse that you will be able to do that through a new DID methods, but it's not happening. So
let's
So I
put
like that example. I'm just pointing out that it's a departure from what we are describing so far in protected headers.
yeah. I guess this is it's worth talking about. I don't think I don't think anything about X509 is of the quality that it will survive at this point. I've been trying to push it along, but you know, if it's like, oh, you get X509, but you have to go through DIDs to get to it, like that's not gonna like land in the current format. We've got to improve the position around the X509 stuff. We've got to remove it, and I'm trying to improve it, but I don't know that it's going to be enough.
So
Isn't that one of the major
at least maybe
hackathon
to
topics?
be- Go ahead.
I was just saying, isn't that one of the major hackathon topics we identified?
God, I hope not. I really don't want to even spend enough time thinking about this. The people who care about this should be doing the work.
Okay, hold on. Maybe I summarized that wrong. We discussed the identity aspects was something we wanted to discuss the hackathon, whether it be did or
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there's lots of things that we could discuss at the hackathon. Can I get through the rest of these slides?
yeah, sure.
Stuck on
Yeah.
X509.
So yeah, maybe on that, I think unavoidably we need to discuss in detail the formatting of the headers and what goes where between registration info, CWT claim, and ordinary headers. And that's a great example where it's probably not very interesting for the presentation, but for now we are inconsistent. So we need to discuss them in details, preferably during the weekend. I'm mentioning that because right now it's not clear at all to me where you will put the certificate chain. And I think if I understand correctly what is in the syntax so far, the certificate chain will need to be a part of the registration information. And maybe that's what you want or not.
I think that part
we discussed, right?
there's an open pull request that adds CDDL for some of these things. In general, the CDDL needs to define what's legal. And
well, we had CDDLs, but those CDDLs were saying the headers were mandatory and very restrictive. So the CDDL we had was allowing that as part of the star in registration info and nowhere else. Huh?
My comment is more that X509 isn't supported unless you explain how to do it in CDDL.
Yeah, and as I said, it was explained in CDDL by the star any in the registration info, which is very implicit. But
what? That's crazy. That's not even a standard thing at all. There's registered. There's already reserved header properties for this.
Yes, that's what we need to discuss in detail. Yes.
Okay, so maybe then it was there, but it just was there reinvented instead of reusing. Because
no, it was worse than that. It was forbidden in the headers and with to be defined registration info that might include it in principle, but it was not in the architecture. It was probably a mistake, but it was not there.
Yeah. Okay, my general comment would be basically no one can understand how to implement it unless there's full CDDL and EDN examples and then test vectors. And until you get to that point, like it's basically just people inventing what they're calling SCITT. And then that's kind of what you're seeing up here on the slide. So that's probably why.
I agree. By us pretending that X509 was not part of it was unhelpful to get to that level of details.
All right. What was the last slide?
Yes.
To where I'm at.
So we're on. Sorry, what was the question?
Go back one slide.
Oh, okay.
Right. This is a sign statement protected header. This is the kind of thing registration policy might look at. Next slide. This is a transparent statement. It includes a receipt. It could have multiple receipts. The multiple receipts thing is a new thing since the last IETF. Receipts are opaque because they are ledger specific. Next slide. A receipt. This is a cozy sign 1. That's the tag 18. In this case, it includes a set of inclusion proofs. The inclusion proofs are ledger transparency service specific, but they're opaque bytes, so that should work for anything. This is new structure since the last IETF. Next slide.
Ori, the proof should be a kind of sequence of hashes, right? Where is the sequence expressed here?
They're encoded. in CBOR. So the entire proof structure becomes CBOR encoded. So it's opaque because different proof systems are going to encode the proofs differently. And that's the draft that we're relying on for profiling receipts.
So I'm missing the algorithm, descriptors or headers.
Yeah, so this example,
You need to say what the tree algorithm is, for example, right?
it's in the protected header, which is encoded here. I didn't include the example of the receipts protected header, but that's what you need to see and to understand these.
But you need to specify also how do you have done the concatenation of these proofs somewhere in the receipt?
Algorithm that's known by the algorithm.
Okay.
So
Because
It needs to be somewhere, but
there's just a missing header for this receipt. We need one more code block that explains the protected header, because that'll say what algorithm you've used, and then that algorithm combined with a proof will tell you how to get to the how to verify basically.
And sorry, I would grab that and I forgot what I was typing. What protected header are we having?
Add protected header. And
Just that protected header. Okay.
notably the algorithm, yeah. So
yeah, it'll be a full protected header. And all of these examples are just, they're all floating around in different places. I just need to put it on a slide.
Okay.
All right. So the CBOR API is really just like, these are the envelopes. These are the interoperability points. So if you don't see something in here, you can add it, but it won't be well understood. The concept of sort of explaining the CBOR API is to say, SCITT defines some envelopes. SCITT has certain parameters of the envelope that are commonly understood and acknowledged in our specification. SCITT also will allow other parameters to be present or forbid other parameters to be present in our specification. Once we've done that, we've described our CBOR API. So coming back to the original comment before we move on, like the CDDL and the draft needs to be, improved. The EDN examples need to be improved because they're kind of like how you understand, different instances of the CDL, so you can explain or see how a CCF, structure might look, or how a RFC 9162 structure might look. So you need examples for all of those so that people can understand what's going on. The examples are in some ways much more important than the text in the document, because implementers will look at the examples to base their implementation. And they won't read this text, like I promise you. It's maddening.
No, I was actually capturing one of the comments that's one of the next things we should be doing for the specs, is starting to fill in some examples.
Yeah. And I think we've got a better structure around opaqueness here. So it should be clear in there has been pull requests. There's several open pull requests that are kind of already adjusting the architecture to be more in line with this presentation. So some of what's confusing here could be that those PRs are not yet merged.
Okay.
Let's look at the
HDPI. Time check, 10 minutes. Where do you want to spend your 8 minutes? So we have 2 minutes to wrap up.
I only have to do one more section. I don't have anything else to cover.
Whose is this?
This is my section.
Okay. So yeah. So you want to jump in?
Yeah. So can you go to slide 20?
Oh, yes.
Covered the CBOR API. Now we're covering the HTTP API. In general, the HTTP API mirrors the CBOR API. At a high level, it's a way to communicate with a transparency service over HTTP. The first thing that you're going to want to do is make your signed statement transparent. You're going to do that by sending your signed statement to the transparency service. Transparency service is going to run its registration policy. It's going to make a decision whether it's going to accept or not. If it accepts, you're going to get a receipt. If it rejects, you're not going to get anything. Once you get the receipt, you can add the receipt to the signed statement to produce the transparent statement. So this first two things are curl. The last thing is locally taking a receipt and putting it into your signed statement. This is just an example of a high-level API, but the point is that you don't need to send the entire thing over the network to get your receipt into your statement. This has been feedback since the last IETF. And then in
I
the
don't understand that, sorry.
well, let me try again with the pictures on the right, because maybe it'll explain. Your
Is
statement
this animated by chance, or is this just static? Was I supposed
static. Your statement is your large artifact, right? So it could be a several terabyte machine learning model or a really, really big SPDX XML file or whatever. You're going to have a tiny sign statement, which is the cozy protected header and the signature and its detached payload, because the statement is gigantic. So you're going to leave it detached. Once you've got your sign statement, you're ready to ask for a receipt. Receipts are for signed statements.
Okay, so now I think I understand, but I believe we disagree on the terminology. So there is what you want to authenticate, and I think that's what you are calling statement, and we did not give it a name yet. And then there is what is actually signed. And so to me, my understanding of the statement is what you get from the signed statement by removing the signature. And that's much more synthetic and specific. So the fact that the signed statements contains a hash of documents is okay, but let's not call the documents before hashing the statement, because that's confusing. But what I would define as a statement is what actually gets signed. Statement is intuitive, but it's not actually defined.
So my understanding is that both signed statements and receipts are integrity protected cozy sign one envelopes. Are we correct?
Yes, that's very clear. The problem is what is the statement, and to me the statement
Yeah.
is something that you can extract from the signed statement.
I think you need to change the statement in the very top circle, brown circle, to document or something, or artifact.
Now, we've been around and around on this terminology. A statement is the
No,
payload
but the
cozy sign
No,
one.
it's very
Yes,
clear that
exactly.
the statement is the thing
Yes,
that is
we are not
signed,
saying that.
not what you compress and turn into hashes before signing.
Yeah.
I just go through the rest of the slides and then we can cover this later, or I'm going to run out of time.
Basically, what we are saying is that whatever goes in the transparency service is your statement.
Yes.
But your big circle is not a statement here, because that is not going to the transparency service, right, Ori? A hash of that might be going in a statement to the transparency service.
Look at the curl. It says that the web server, that's the transparency service, receives two files, statement and signed statement. Now, I don't care what the transparency service does with these two files. I'm just here to describe the high-level API. You could co-locate your artifact repository and your transparency log, or you could separate them. That's not my business.
I think that's the core of the disagreement. So
Yes.
in the architecture so far, the signed statement contains the statement, so there is no separate statement
There's
argument.
no separate, exactly.
Well, it's really bad idea that, because
we've talked about detached content quite a bit.
super
Yeah,
bad.
but it's not working. So
Hold on.
Not going to be an
Can we
attached-
agree? Can we agree that that is the one item that we're just disagreeing here? Whether detached content is a formalized thing? Just because I think everything else Ori described, everybody agreed with.
So it's related, but it's not the same. We disagree on the use of statement for the thing that get turned into what will be signed by hashing or compression.
So it's either the hash of a content or it is the content. Is that?
So I know discussing the terminology is very boring, but we can't change the definition of statement by accident in this slide.
Yes, because it breaks the architecture. It breaks the architecture.
When you say break, like, what is the disagreement? Is the disagreement that the signed statement already includes the statement, or is the disagreement that the signed statement here in this illustrates that it's actually detached content? What is I don't understand the disagreement.
So let me try to summarize. So the disagreement is what do we call the okay, so, assuming we understand what the signed statement is. If you take the signed statement and you remove the signature, then you obtain what I would define as the statement. While to Ori, you obtain what is the result of taking piece of evidence, that is the informal statement, and computing hashes or summaries of it.
What I'm saying is exactly the same thing you're saying. So
the statement is something that is a function of the signed statement, so there is no need.
Yeah.
pass it separately, right?
I think there's a general lack of understanding around how detached payloads work in cozy sign 1 envelopes. And if that was clearly understood, we would all be agreeing to the same picture. But because it's not clearly understood, we're arguing over the same thing, but we all actually agree.
No, but there is another thing as well, which I have on to add.
He's got 3 more slides or 4 more slides. Let's bucket that one because it
Okay,
sounds
so
like
important.
Let's push the
important,
detached
but
envelope
it
on
is
the stack. We
one-
need to discuss it because what is in
We're not
cozy
gonna
is
solve it
unusable
here.
for SCITT, yes.
we're not going to solve it here.
The fundamental
Let's
is
review his other content to see if we have 1 item that we're disagreeing with or 5. Can we
I
let
think
him
we
go
have
through this?
more than what Cedric said. I have a slight problem is we never said that API will allow us to push just the statement to the transparency service. That's not a part of the architecture. We say API allows us to put signed statement into transparency service. So that's
Again,
also
lack of understanding regarding detached payloads. You can't verify a signature unless you have the thing that you have signed.
Yeah, so detach payloads in cozy is useless, but there is not much we can do about it on this
Well,
slide.
if it's useless, then good luck sending your several terabyte machine learning model to a transparency service.
Yeah, it's not useless, Cedric. We use it live in our production system.
Okay, that's too strong a statement, but it's not ideal for SCITT. We would much prefer to have a format where you can communicate the statement as part of the signed statement.
Sure, but let's let Ori finish his structure here.
Literally, that's
We're moving on. We're moving on, guys. This is what the in-person conversations can be on Saturday and Sunday. We're only a couple of days away.
So
Go ahead, Ori.
we had this gigantic, awful experience regarding feeds, and I'm still here trying to fix it. So basically, we have this CBOR API. That's for the conceptual messages. The HTTP API, that's for moving the conceptual messages across, to different parties. And then you have this question of like, what questions can I ask a transparency service regarding conceptual messages that it's seen? And that was the concept of feed from the perspective of asking a transparency service, but not the concept of feed when an issuer considering metadata that they're signing over in addition to their payload they're securing. So we split these things apart, and now we still have actually an opportunity to use the word feed to describe the thing that you ask a transparency service about. And based on the several IETFs that we've had, my understanding is that feeds are a thing that you can ask a transparency service about. So you could ask a service about which suppliers it has. You could ask a service about, give me everything you know about this product, give me all the origin certificates for this thing, tell me about this guy and every key he's ever had, etc. These are questions. And as a supply chain actor, you might be interested in knowing about information about your upstream suppliers, and you might be interested in providing information to your downstream suppliers. So feeds have a sort of directionality in them. And basically, the last time we gave a presentation on feeds, we tried to talk about GS1. That was definitely a mistake. This time, I'm going to try and talk about soup, which is hopefully easier for everyone to understand. It has ingredients. We're out of time, so I'm going to end here, and I'll see you all at the hackathon.
I see. This is
Thanks,
your examples where you're going to soup.
I've got a great AI generated image of having a fly in my soup for this purpose as well.
Yeah,
It's a great move, Ori.
Yeah,
I had tried really hard to get the AI to generate a nice QR code with AI, but unfortunately, I can't figure out how to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, as I think this requires much more discussion. I think we are going back to the part of the discussions where we are not really talking about feed, but about query language for querying the log, and confusing the two issue, I think, is a bit dangerous, although the feed can help, but just tackling the issue of how we are going to query the register statement just by looking at the feed is too much for the feed, and at least it's a very peculiar way to defining what the feed should be. And And
I
that
mean, they remove-
Another great topic for the hackathon, which is how do we start leveraging the registration policies or whatever we wind up calling them, and the feed and the non-opaque headers, so that
Yeah.
somebody can create good query language over it.
So just in general, everything that I put together here is based on what was discussed at the last IETF, where we had a lot of discussion around feed. We had a lot of confusion about feed. And yeah, so I'm just reacting to what people told me at the last IETF and trying to make it less confusing. And agree with what Cedric is saying about querying. Like at the last IETF, people spent a lot of time talking about how feeds and queries are related. Like there was a substantial amount of conversation that I was a part of regarding that. And it was obvious that people are confused based on what they're reading in the document. So we can try and improve it, but the other thing we could do at the end of this is we could say we're going to downscope substantially. We're going to complete our charter deliverables and ship it, and then let the industry handle some of these tougher cases without the guidance of the IETF. That's also a great option to keep on the table, and we could talk about what that might look like.
For the query language, I think it will make perfect sense, because defining full query languages from scratch seems too much.
Okay.
Let's discuss in person. Yes, I need to go as well.
Yeah, I have to go as well. So, all right, perfect queue up. I think Hannes made the comment. This is a perfect queue up for being at IETF. Cedric, I know you'll be there. That's great. Yogesh, you said you'll be there for the weekend and through Monday. That's awesome. AJ, thank you for joining and helping. And
I did legitimately nothing. I will ask all of you how I can do something after this.
So we can use, if you want to reply all to this message, to the calendar invite, so we can continue the conversations there. I don't know if everybody's on Slack. So I think there's a cap of 9 people on Slack. So email, let's just use email for now. Leave notes, comments in the slides or whatever. And I leave Thursday, so I'll be MIA on Thursday US time and arrive Friday. So sometime Friday, I'll be out of blackout period at that point, and looking forward. So I'll be around.
Are you guys on Signal by any chance? We used Signal quite effectively last time in one of the IETFs.
Yeah, I think Signal is a great tool for while we're there. I think it's perfect. So AJ, if you can ping me your Signal, or I'll ping you mine, whatever, and I'll get you connected.
Sure, yes, sir.
AJ made an excellent suggestion about URN software company : something, an awesome product. So thanks. I think that's something I would love to.
I was going to make one that was far more inappropriate and ironic, but I've learned at government jobs that my sense of humor is a risk and it's not a reward.
Can we kill the recording for a second?
What was that, Roy? Oh, yeah, hold on.
Recording.